Tripod, the official Trinity University Press podcast, invites authors, journalists, community leaders, and other guests to engage in exploratory, informative discussions on the subject of people, places, and the planet.
I'm Lily Brennan, and welcome to another episode of Tripod, the official podcast of the Trinity University Press. Joining me today is Tripod's executive producer and director of the press, Tom Payton, who is here to introduce our guest author, David Ladensohn, and discuss the evolution of his book, Fly Fishing with Leonardo da Vinci, his life in San Antonio, and what his experience can teach all of us. Welcome, Tom and David.
Thank you, Lily. I am so excited to have you here with us today, David. Of course, your book will be coming out shortly. We can talk about that, but just thinking back as to when I really met you first, and I don't know when that was. Of course, had met your wife, Claudia, many times, and at some point, I saw you over in the corner at some events and managed to meet you. I think we had some short conversations, and then we sat down for coffee a while back just to get to know each other better. And I quickly learned that day that any sit down for coffee with you will turn into a 2 to 3 hour conversation, which is my favorite conversation to have. Your book is Fly Fishing with Leonardo da Vinci, and boy, there's a lot of departure points for a conversation about that, but I want to back up to the basics. Fly fishing.
So I started fishing as a young child with my grandfather. Both my grandparents loved to go, and my grandfather's retired. We used to go down to Rockport and Seadrift down along the Texas Gulf Coast. So I grew up enjoying just obviously being with my grandparents, but we say the tug is the drug. It's really fun when you've got a wild animal connected at the end of a line with you, whether it's a perch or a redfish. And in 1984, my best friend from college, who is still my best friend 50-something years out of college, asked me to go fly fishing with him. I said, sure, and I had a great day on the Madison River in Montana. We caught a lot of fish. I didn't realize that it's not always like that. He had picked a place and a time that he hoped I would catch a lot of fish and get hooked, if you'll pardon the pun. And I have been fishing more and more and more ever since. So last year I actually fished over 100 days. It's bitten hard. I love it. I love everything about the sport. I like taking out people who've never fished before. I like going out with people who are avid anglers. I've worked it into my wife's and my retirement. So in 2 weeks I'm going to Mongolia to go fishing for just really to go, but also it happens that the world's largest species of trout lives in Mongolia, and maybe I'll catch one, maybe I won't, but I'm guaranteed to have a good time.
Never gets old.
Never gets old. Every day is different. The puzzle that is fly fishing, where are the fish, what are they doing today, what are they eating, why won't they do? I did so well yesterday, I'm doing the same thing today, why is it not working? That's the puzzle, and I have to say, because my life revolves around Leonardo for the last 5 years, was always trying to figure out the world's puzzles.
Let's actually go a little deeper with it, the idea of the puzzle. I love that. So for those that don't know fly fishing,
Yes.
what are the puzzle pieces? What are the factors, the elements that drive a successful or unsuccessful outing?
The first one for me, the first connection to Leonardo was actually that when I first saw, just a little over 5 years ago, one of Leonardo's drawings of river currents, it struck me as very familiar. In fact, there's a drawing, I've got it in the book, that on one half of the page is an old man who is probably a caricature of Leonardo by himself, and on the other half of the page are these beautiful river currents, and it looks like he's looking at them. He may or may not. Probably didn't actually draw it that way, but it's out of the binding now, and it appears that way. And I looked at this drawing and thought, I know exactly what Leonardo is doing, or this man is doing. He's trying to figure out what's going on with these river currents. So the first part of a fly fishing puzzle is, where are the fish? There's an aphorism that 90% of the fish are in 10% of the water. 10% of the anglers catch 90% of the fish. A big part of that is because they have a better idea when they look at a river of where the fish will be. So that's the first piece of the puzzle. Where are the fish? Because you cannot catch a fish no matter if you have the perfect fly and the perfect cast and you manage the shadows correctly and everything. If there's not a fish there, you're not going to catch a fish. And so the first part is what we call reading the water. That's a big part of the puzzle. Then, how do you make your fly, which is like a lure, it's an artificial bug or little fish, how do you make it look natural enough that the fish goes and eats it instead of being scared and saying, oh, there's this big thing coming down the river and I certainly don't want to eat it. Where do you want to stand in order that your cast lands in the right place so that the fly gets to the fish still looking natural? If you're lucky enough to hook the fish, if the fish eats and then you're able to hook it, where are you going to land it? In a rapidly flowing river, that can get to be a real problem. You may be in a perfect place to stand, but you can't take a step in any direction, and the fish takes off upstream, downstream. You may not be able to land it. And then how do you safely release the fish? You don't want to hurt the fish, you don't want to handle it very long, and you don't want to pull on it too long. So if it's tired out, if you have a kind of long battle, which can be, depends on the water temperature, but if the fish is tired, you want to be able to rest the fish and sort of revive it so that it's got full strength before you let it go so it doesn't get swept away by the current. Those are a few parts of the puzzle.
It's not a relaxing.
It's extremely relaxing.
In its own way, but it's a lot to be tending to.
Well, that's right, and Leonardo talked about observation. I claim this is his favorite word. He was constantly talking about observation. Part of the success of fly fishing is thinking about all these things when you're getting ready to cast. Once you figured out that's where the fish is, then where do I stand? Where are the shadows going to fall? How do I avoid spooking the fish, et cetera, et cetera. But the concentration it takes to fish well requires a lot of observation, but it gets to be habit. And so what I tell my wife when I come home, she says, well, what'd you think about today? I mean, you've been gone 8 hours. I said, I thought about fish. It takes total concentration, but in a good way. One of my favorite authors, Diane Ackerman, wrote a book called Deep Play, and it was about how relaxing it is to concentrate on something like dangerous mountain climbing. So you come back from a day of fishing, and I'm thinking about what I did right, what I did wrong, what I'm going to do next time. I just love it.
So, Da Vinci, the whimsy in the title aside, it is in your mind a very serious interest on your part, but connection here. At some point, you obviously had to speculate if fly fishing had been what fly fishing is today in the Renaissance, would Leonardo da Vinci have been a fly fisherman?
The argument of my book is really that he would have been the greatest fly fishing guide. I don't know. I like to think he could have fished. He might have enjoyed it. But I'm confident that he could have been the greatest fly fishing guide of all time because the elements that it takes to be a good guide, he had them all. His powers of observation were extraordinary, his ability to connect the dots, and I've been out with many fishing guides. I've been fishing now for 43 summers, and you go out with a guide, and you need to have a good time. We are, after all, out to have fun. And when you do things wrong, you want a guide who doesn't yell at you. You want somebody who will say something encouraging or something funny. Leonardo had a remarkable sense of humor. He made up jokes. He made up riddles. He could sing, although I've never had a fishing guide sing to me. He put on spectacles for his patrons, who were nobility in Florence and Milan. So he had a way of producing dramas and comedies that would have made him very entertaining. Obviously, he was a very creative person. So I am speculating that he would have been a great guide, but because I've been out with so many guides through the years, I have every confidence that he would have. Now, some people might say, well, he kind of had more important things to do, but from my position, there's really nothing more important than fishing and being a fishing guide. I do imagine him that way. The book is not a fictionalized version. I don't imagine him as my fishing buddy or my fishing guide. I talk about his personality. There's a biographical element to the book. It's only 200 pages, and it's sort of 4 different strands woven together. So there are many, many longer biographies of Leonardo, but I've taken enough of his life story to make the argument of why he would have been a delightful person to go out and spend a day on the river with.
Here at Tripod, we're particularly focused on, as we call it, people, place, and planet. Stepping back to your fly fishing adventures
Yes.
around the globe, talk a little bit about some of the most storied or interesting, for whatever reason, kind of places you've been, and how just that sense of fly fishing as a path to seeing the world for you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure having a lot of great experiences and meeting a lot of people around the world. Tell us about that.
Well, just to mention a couple, the guide that I go out with the most often in New Mexico is from Taos. And he was invited by someone who was starting a fishing operation in Slovenia, where not many Americans go fishing, part of the former Yugoslavia. He was invited to go and see their operation and go fishing like for free. He said, "Do you want to go along?" And I said, "Absolutely." I'm proud of my geographical knowledge, but I couldn't have picked Slovenia on a map. So I said, "That sounds great. I'm in." And so I went with him and his cousin, who's a guide at another shop in Colorado. So we went. We had a great time in Slovenia, which I highly recommend to your listeners as a country to go to. I joke that they save money on vowels. Slovenian is not a language that you're going to pick up easily, but the people are delightful, and most of them speak English. It's a member of the EU. It's sandwiched between Italy, Austria, and Croatia. And the spectacular part, in addition to the fact that they have a trout that is only in that area of Italy and Slovenia, called the marble trout. It's a very beautiful fish that I'd never seen, much less caught. What was spectacular about it is the color of the water. It's karst, like we have in San Antonio, which is a limestone with a lot of holes in it. And so the water seeps down into the ground, dissolves some of this limestone in it, and so it has tiny particles of white limestone, and the riverbeds are white. So if you imagine a beautiful swimming pool, you know how a white swimming pool bottom turns the water turquoise. The river is turquoise. It's absolutely beautiful. And if you don't get to see it, it's shocking because it has this white bottom and it also has little particles of limestone in it. And so it just sparkles turquoise. It's the most spectacular water I've seen any place. And the fishing is good and the people are nice, and it's in kind of the southeastern part of the Alps. They call it the Julian Alps there. Very steep, very impressive, great place to go fishing. Another place that comes to mind is in Argentina. My wife is a great sport. She has no interest in fishing, but she encourages me to go places, and if it's appealing, she'll go with me. So 2 winters ago, we spent the entire winter in northern Patagonia, about 800 miles outside of Buenos Aires. There are glacial lakes, and these lakes, the town we stayed in, San Martín de los Andes, is on one of the smaller lakes. So when I got there, I saw the lake, and I said, this is not my idea of a small lake. It's about 15 miles long, about 2 miles wide. It's 700 feet deep, and it takes 5 years for all the beautiful, fresh, clean water that's in that lake to come into the river. It's always being recharged by snowmelt. Where you fish there, not so much in the lake, but in the rivers that come in and out of these lakes, there are huge willow trees, and the leaves hang down to the surface of the water, and the fish, in addition to eating the bugs that are in the water, which is what we normally are fishing with, the fish will be right downstream from where the branches of the willow tree are touching the water. So when the wind blows, the bugs fall out of the tree and the fish eat them, which creates a tremendous challenge for the angler to get your fly to land just upstream of where the fish is without being caught in the trees. Sometimes it works and often it doesn't.
Trinity University Press is a mission-driven publisher committed to civic engagement with timely ideas facilitated by the publication of print and digital books, related media, creative and educational programs, and other activities that help us all better understand our place in a crowded world. For more than 50 years, Trinity University Press has published more than 225 titles and organized thousands of events, all focused on broadening our understanding of many impactful subjects, from human relationships with our physical environments to social equity and justice. For more information about Trinity University Press, visit tupress.org.
Let's jump back to Da Vinci. I am curious, speaking about place, in your travels, I imagine you walked in the footsteps of Da Vinci, in addition to reading about Da Vinci and becoming the armchair devotee that you have. Tell me about your ventures in northern Italy. And
I call it chasing Leonardo. When I was in Slovenia, I met a fishing guide who was Italian. And I have to say, I hadn't really thought much about fishing in Italy. It's not, people talk about New Zealand and Argentina and Alaska and Colorado. I don't think I had known anyone who'd been fly fishing in Italy. So this fellow is a guide, and I said, could you guide me on the river Adda, A-D-D-A? This was a river that Leonardo spent a lot of time on, and he said, sure. So I went back last year, that was 2023, with my wife, and we chased Leonardo around Italy. So we went to Vaprio di Adda, where he spent a full year with his retinue and invented a new kind of ferry boat to get passengers across. And even today, that ferry boat exists a bit upstream. That design can carry one car. It's a one-car ferry attached to a chain. The ferryman pulls you across. The river is beautiful. You have a tremendous feeling when you walk in the footsteps, as you say, of any famous person. It's like they were really here. I mean, I don't want to call it idolatry, but after you spend as much time with Leonardo or anyone as I have spent with Leonardo, it's pretty exciting to be in his area. So we went to Vinci, where he was born, visited in Anciano, just up the road, called Casa Natale, the birthplace, the house where he was born. He wasn't born there. And that is really fascinating, and I try to talk about this in the book, maybe joke about it a little bit, that there's a lot of legend about Leonardo that's just not true, and it's demonstrably untrue. So the man is a myth and a real man. And so when we were in Anciano and in Vinci, I wanted to imagine what it would be like if he had gone fishing as a little boy, because he had a bunch of half-brothers and sisters. They would have been a gang to run around the neighborhood with. And so I went down in the steep valley. I figured there's got to be a little creek down here someplace. And so I found the creek outside of both Vinci and Anciano. It's more of a dry creek in the summer near Vinci, but a little stream out of Anciano, which powered several mills. I thought a lot about Leonardo as a child. There's very, very little factual evidence of that period. I didn't make it up, but I do dream a little bit about it. Maybe a couple sentences in the book. I wrote a whole chapter, but it was fictional, and I cut it out in the end because, like my speaking to you today, I tend to run on, so I ended up cutting the book from 62 chapters to 24. And so also we went to places that he worked as an adult. So on the rivers that feed into Milan, he not only worked on improving locks, he worked on preventing erosion on the rivers around Florence. He invented a new kind of lock that is actually still used on canals. It was much more labor efficient. I went looking in Milan for where his original lock was like that, and this canal is no longer there, but I found it in a little ditch, tracked it down. It's not marked or anything like that. It was important to me. Let's put it that way. It may not have been important to any other tourist in Milan, but I loved it.
Yeah, I've always found them guilty of failing to slow down and remind myself about this when traveling. But and it can be right here in our own backyard, in our hometowns as well. But I'm always try to be intentional about thinking about the place where I am, because the word place, it's so used today, and sometimes with substance and sometimes it's almost cliched, but. The thing that fascinates me most about a place we may find ourselves is pausing to think about whether it's the named idols, people that have been there before, or just everyday situations you may or may not sleuth or find on a marker or some fabled story that gets shared with you, but just a sense of like who's walked in these footsteps before, and the degree to which these places may have changed, but they really largely haven't changed over time. And I remember once climbing some bell tower, exhausted on the 290th step. It was winded, so I paused in some little nook so people could squeeze by, because those were wide enough up and down for one person. And a woman coming down told me, was a local, and said she made a point to climb that bell tower at least once a month. But she told me a wonderful story about, I think, mid-19th century, 160 years, 70 years ago, about some crime that had occurred, and the bell ringer had not locked the door that day and the criminal on the flee. I'm sure it was a petty like shoplifting or mugging or something, but the criminal kind of on the run happened to see the door cracked open and without anybody noticing disappeared in the valley. But how the search for this criminal went on for days, and he was just holed up in the bell tower, and it's become this just big local. It's just so whether it's just he climbed those same stairs I'm traipsing up, and it's just fascinating to think about. It's not just about you and your experience and I'm here now, or the mad rush to get to this museum or see this site, but just kind of be in the place and realize the everyday life that's gone on there.
When you mention museum, that reminds me of two places that we went chasing Leonardo across northern Italy, because we see the very few paintings. There's only about 20 paintings by Leonardo that are generally agreed are by Leonardo, spread around, where he painted more, but not that many more, and most of them have just disappeared with time, which is, it may be in one of your listeners' attics. It's worth looking. But two places that I remember with particular interest, both in Milan. One is when you go to visit the Last Supper, you can't help but think about the fact that not just that Leonardo was here, but he spent vast amounts of time on his scaffold painting on the wall of the refectory of the monastery. So he didn't just pass by here, but he was working here for a long time. And what I particularly enjoyed was on the other wall, there was a painting I had never seen before by another Italian Renaissance artist of the Crucifixion, and it's equally as large as the Last Supper and very fine. In the corner, there is a donor portrait, so people often at that time who were paying for a painting wanted their own picture of themselves, their spouse, their children praying, on their knees, maybe around a crucifixion or a nativity. And so they're there in their Renaissance costume, looking at an ancient Roman scene. And it turns out this was not by Leonardo, but Leonardo was requested, maybe ordered to paint the donor portrait on the Last Supper. And apparently he said, no, I'll do it on that painting, on the other end of the same hall, the refectory, the cafeteria where the monks would eat. And so when you look at a typical book of Leonardo paintings, that's not in there because it's not on the Last Supper. It's across the room. That was very interesting to me. And then similarly, the castle where the Duke of Milan lived, and he was not a constant patron of Leonardo. Leonardo was always needing money, and even when he got a job from the Duke didn't always pay on time. In fact, he seldom paid on time. In his castle is a room that Leonardo did the decoration. He painted vines going up the corners of the room, and it's like, well, the wall decoration, the painter, like you would have a house painter, Leonardo was the house painter for the inside of this room. That's just not something you normally think of, and so it was quite fascinating. Imagine, I don't know if this was a commission or punishment for something that the Duke was not happy with to make him get up and paint this ceiling. But it's quite extraordinary.
Having all this come together in book form now, how would you say that Da Vinci in particular has influenced you or changed you? Dare I ask?
Oh, certainly. You may dare. You may dare ask. I think that I've read enough of quotations, translations from his notebooks, that his philosophy has affected me. So I'm 72 now. The end is in sight here. And he says, life is long enough if you use it well. I think about that. He was such a busy person that he looked down on people who were idle. Now, I have to say, I spend so much time fly fishing. Some people would think that's idle, but of course I don't. But Leonardo felt that if you used your life and the gifts that we have by being humans instead of mice, that you could have a happy death. He says something like, a day well spent leads to a happy sleep, and a life well spent leads to a happy death. I like that idea, that concept. The other thing is that I've always been curious, and so I look at the life of Leonardo and say, if you combine exceptional curiosity, which Leonardo had, with an exceptional work ethic, you can achieve some things. I'm not saying in an objective way that everybody would say that's a great achievement, but rather what you want to do, you can do it if you're willing to think about what you want to do and work at it. I have Thomas Edison is quoted as saying, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And Leonardo exemplified that. He worked constantly on mathematics and optics and hydraulics, the subject that I'm interested in. And he wasn't just idly dreaming up what we call the helicopter or the structure to fly with. He may or may not have actually flown in that, but it's been built in the late 20th century and tested, and it works. He constantly intellectually busy, but also physically active. He actually hiked. I mean, I don't think hiking for pleasure was a thing in the 16th century, but he did it. He would go up into the mountains to observe nature, to observe the fires that the Swiss were setting to fight with the Italians. And he has influenced me greatly. And when I'm out fishing, I try to say, okay, pay attention, because that's his emphasis on observation. So I try to follow some of his instructions. He would have been a very interesting person to hang around with. That's why he would be a good fishing guide.
Love it. Of course, the new PBS series by Ken Burns, it focuses on Da Vinci. But you have a blurb from Ken Burns on the cover of your book. Tell us how that came to pass.
Well, through a fluke, I got to meet Ken Burns a number of years ago. He was working on his Vietnam documentary. My closest friend's wife is in a book group with Ken Burns, and they were invited to dinner at his house. And I'm a very lucky person, so I've had things like this happen before, where I'm a guest at someone's house and I end up as an uninvited guest at a dinner or a party or something like that. I met Ken Burns, and we were talking about the Vietnam series he was working on, and he is a wonderful storyteller himself and expansive. And then I learned that he was working on a documentary on Leonardo. Actually, his daughter and her husband, Sarah Burns and Dave McMahon, who moved to Tuscany for a year to do their research for the documentary, and it's coming out November 18th and 19th on PBS. When the book was done, and you said who would be a good blurb writer, well, here's somebody who's well-known, very steeped in things Leonardo, and so I reached out and said, would you consider doing this? And he wrote this very, very flattering piece that we've put on the cover, and of course is very surprised and happy that he did this, not only because he's Ken Burns and he and his daughter and son-in-law have produced this documentary, but because he really knows Leonardo. They really know Leonardo, and I'm very much looking forward to watch the premiere of Leonardo, because I've enjoyed every Ken Burns documentary I've ever seen. I think most people do.
Of course. And to those ends, the big question, I think that Da Vinci, I think that most people know a little bit about Da Vinci, or imagine that they do. And I think most people probably don't know very much at all about fly fishing. And so while the Da Vinci devotees will take a peek at the curiosity of this book, and I imagine plenty of anglers will be interested in the book, what do you hope the everyday reader, without any particular passion for Da Vinci or knowledge of fishing, takes away from your book?
Honestly, I hope they'll enjoy it. It's not a scholarly book. It's meant to be interesting and entertaining. That's the mood, I would call it, of the book. I hope the reader turns the page. I hope the stories are interesting enough and woven together between fishing and Leonardo that it keeps the reader turning the page. Because my original objective, and it's still an important objective, is what he did as a hydraulic engineer, the drawings that he made, which are beautiful, fascinating, and not very well known. I hope that the angler and the person who is interested in Leonardo, which is just about everybody because he touched so many spheres, will say, gosh, I never saw these pictures before, and these really are interesting, and why he would draw them, being a hydraulic engineer, and governments for which he worked will all be interesting. And I've tried to keep it lighthearted, because I had the great privilege to meet many of the scholars who have spent their whole lives, their whole careers working on Leonardo. That's not my expertise. And I hope that they will find that the connection between fishing, hydraulics, drawing is a legitimate one, that it's real, because I think he saw a link between everything and everything. It's all part of this place we call Earth, the place he called home, the places he called home. You can't have fish without rivers. You can't have rivers without the water cycle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Leonardo saw the whole world, our environment, as of a piece.
Perfect. I think that connectivity and the reminders that we need to not take for granted and work to see that connectivity in so much of our daily lives is a discussion we really need to be having now more than ever. So perfect answer, perfect example of that. Thank you so much, David, for taking time to talk to us today here at Tripod.
Thank you for having me and for making my dream come true by publishing this book.
Thank you for joining Tom, David, and I for another episode of Exploring People, Places, and Our Planet with Tripod. Come back soon.